Eleanor Vaughn was 64 years old and standing on a brick sidewalk in Chestnut Hill, holding a ceramic mug of tea that had gone cold in her hand, watching strangers carry her life out of a house that was no longer hers. The divorce had been finalized that morning. 35 years of marriage dissolved in a conference room that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and her ex-husband's expensive cologne, the kind that costs more than most people spend on groceries in a month. The numbers had been read aloud by his attorney, a woman named Margot, something who Eleanor was certain was kind to her own mother, but who recited the terms of Eleanor's dismissal with the flat mechanical tone of someone reading lunch specials at a diner. Hollis kept the Chestnut Hill house, the one with the garden Eleanor had planted with her own hands 17 years ago, the one where she'd repaired the slate roof tiles after the ice storm of 2014 because Hollis said contractors were thieves, and she'd learned how to do it herself from library books. He kept the shore property in Stone Harbor, the place where their children had learned to swim, where Eleanor had spent 20 summers cooking in a kitchen with windows that looked out at the Atlantic. He kept Vaughn Construction and Development, the company Eleanor had helped him start in the early 90s by drafting his first real set of blueprints for free on their kitchen table, while their infant son slept in a bouncer at her feet. He kept both vehicles, the Range Rover and the BMW, the cars she had helped pay for with money she'd earned teaching high school physics before Trevor was born. Money that had gone into a joint account that became his account somewhere along the way when she wasn't paying attention. He kept the retirement accounts in his name, which it turned out was most of them. Eleanor got $42,000. $42,000 for 35 years. Not annually. Total. Hollis had said, when she stared at the number, "Too long, you're being dramatic, Jeannie. That's liquid. You'll land on your feet. You always do." He said it the way you'd encourage a contestant on a game show who'd just lost, but was expected to smile for the camera anyway. Vanessa Cole was waiting in the car. Hollis's new wife, 31 years old, younger than both of Eleanor's children, a corporate attorney at the firm that handled Vaughn Construction's contracts. Long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that probably cost $200 to maintain. A laugh that could cut glass. Eleanor had seen her only twice before. The first time 6 months ago at a holiday party Eleanor hadn't been invited to, but had gone to anyway because she was still on paper Hollis's wife. Vanessa had looked at Eleanor that night with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. The way you look at an old coat someone forgot to take to Goodwill. An antique chair no one had bothered to remove from the room. Now, Vanessa sat in the passenger seat of the Range Rover, scrolling through her phone, waiting for her new husband to finish the last piece of old business. The second suitcase hit the sidewalk with a thud that made Eleanor flinch. Then the third. A garbage bag of shoes that split at the seam, spilling pumps and sneakers onto the brick. A box of photo albums the mover had labeled fragile without understanding what fragile actually meant. Trevor was standing on the porch, 42 years old, Eleanor's firstborn. The baby she'd walked circles with at 3 in the morning when he had colic. The boy she'd taught to ride a bicycle on this very street. Now a commercial real estate broker who worked out of his father's building. he had not offered to help her carry anything. "Mom." His voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. "Dad's trying to be reasonable. $42,000 is a lot of money. It's what's left after your father moved the rest." Eleanor said it quietly, without inflection. A simple statement of fact. "You can't prove that." "I'm not trying to." Trevor looked away. His loyalty had calcified years ago into something that looked like pragmatism but was really just fear of losing access. Hollis was his boss, his landlord, his golf partner, his future inheritance. Eleanor was his mother. Hollis had won that equation long before anyone had said the word divorce out loud. Kendall, her daughter, had at least called that morning. "Mom, I know this is hard, but you have to be realistic. Dad's moving on. You need to, too. Take the money, get a nice little apartment somewhere near the main line. Figure out who you are. Figure out who you are." As if Eleanor had been misplaced. As if she hadn't spent 3.5 decades being exactly where she was supposed to be. At PTA meetings, at Trevor's baseball games, at the Vaughn construction Christmas dinners, where she smiled and nodded while Hollis took credit for blueprints she'd drawn. At the Chestnut Hill Garden Club. At the hospital bedside when Hollis's father was dying. At the church when his mother was buried. Being the woman the life required. The Range Rover horn beeped lightly. Just once. A polite reminder. Hollis checked his watch. The Rolex Eleanor had given him for their 20th anniversary. The one she'd saved for secretly by tutoring neighborhood kids in math on Saturday mornings for 2 years. Vanessa didn't look up from her phone. Eleanor picked up the first suitcase, then the second, then the third. She carried them one by one to the curb where a rideshare she had ordered was already pulling up. A silver Camry with a chipped windshield, and a driver who looked too tired to ask questions. She loaded her entire life into the trunk of a stranger's car, while her ex-husband looked at his phone. And her son stood on the porch of a house she had chosen decorated and defended from storms for nearly 30 years. The driver asked if she needed help with the garbage bag. She said, "No, thank you." When the car pulled away, Eleanor did not cry. She didn't look back. She looked straight ahead at the back of the driver's headrest, past the air freshener shaped like a pine tree, through the windshield at the gray October sky over Philadelphia, and she felt something strange settling in her chest. Something she hadn't felt since she was 21 years old in her final year at Cornell. Standing in a studio at 3 a.m. with a drafting pencil in her hand, and the blueprints of a building she had designed spread out on the table in front of her. It was the feeling of having nothing left to lose, and underneath it, quieter but unmistakable, the first faint hum of being awake. The extended stay motel on Route 1 in Bensalem cost $71 a night, and smelled like carpet shampoo and somebody else's cigarettes. The kind of place where the ice machine rattled like it was dying and the vending machine only accepted exact change. Eleanor took a room on the second floor because the ground floor faced the highway, and she needed, if not quiet, at least the illusion of it. Room 214. A double bed with a comforter that had been washed so many times the pattern had faded to ghosts. A desk bolted to the wall. A television mounted high in the corner like a security camera. A bathroom with a shower curtain that didn't quite reach the tub. She unpacked one suitcase. Enough clothes for a week. Toiletries. A framed photograph of her children taken when they were still young enough to believe she could fix anything. The other 2 suitcases she left, zipped. She told herself it was temporary. The first week she slept 13 hours a night. Her body surrendering to exhaustion it had been holding for years. She dreamed of houses with rooms she couldn't find, staircases that led nowhere, doors that opened onto walls. The second week she couldn't sleep at all. She lay in the dark listening to trucks on the highway, to the couple arguing in the room next door, to the sound of her own breathing in a space that wasn't hers and never would be. She called Kendall on a Tuesday. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She left a message asking how Willa was doing. Her granddaughter, 15 years old now. Eleanor hadn't seen her since before the separation. Kendall didn't call back. She called Trevor on a Thursday. He picked up on the 4th ring, said he was heading into a meeting and promised to call her back. He didn't. She stopped calling after the 3rd unanswered week. The math was simple and brutal. $71 a night was $2,130 a month before she had eaten a single meal or paid for gasoline or bought soap or replaced the shoes that were wearing through at the heel. She applied for apartments in Roxborough, in Manayunk, in Ambler. Every single one required first month, last month, and security deposit plus proof of income she no longer had. A teacher's pension from the 5 years she'd worked before Trevor was born paid her $612 a month. Her Social Security wouldn't kick in at full value until she was 67. She watched the $42,000 drain like bathwater. $1,600 for the first month at the motel, $200 for food, $80 for gas, $40 for the phone bill, $60 for prescriptions, another $100 for the storage unit where she'd put the furniture Hollis didn't want. By the end of October, she had $37,000 left. By Thanksgiving, $32,000. One night in the motel, unable to sleep, she opened her laptop, the old one, the one Kendall had said she should replace years ago because it was too slow. She typed her own name into a search engine. Eleanor Vaughn. Nothing came up. Not a profile. Not a byline. Not a picture. Not a single trace that she had existed in any public way for the last 3.5 decades. She tried her maiden name, Eleanor Hale, and there, 4 pages deep in the results, she found a single line from a 1986 Cornell Daily Sun article about an undergraduate design competition. Eleanor Hale, 3rd-year architecture student, received honorable mention for her adaptive reuse proposal of the Ithaca Rail Depot. She sat looking at that sentence for a long time. She could still see the drawings, the elevation views she'd rendered in ink on vellum, the floor plans she'd revised 7 times because the stairwell placement wasn't right. She could still smell the vellum, That clean chemical smell mixed with pencil graphite and the coffee someone always had brewing in the studio. She could still feel the weight of the drafting pencils in her hand. The mechanical precision of line work. The satisfaction of a corner that met exactly right. That woman felt like someone Eleanor had known a long time ago. A friend she'd lost touch with and couldn't quite remember how to call. She had met Hollis in the spring 3 months before her graduation. A mutual friend's engagement party on a rooftop in Old City. String lights and cheap wine, and the kind of optimism you only have when you're 22 and the whole world feels like it's waiting for you to step into it. He was 26. Already running a 2-truck demolition outfit that he swore would be a construction empire within a decade. He had the kind of confidence that feels like truth when you're young. The kind that makes you believe a person when they tell you what your future is gonna look like. He'd told her that first night that her hands looked like an architect's hands. Long fingers, ink stains, a callus on her middle finger from holding a pencil. He'd meant it as a compliment, and she had taken it as one. She had been accepted into the graduate program at Penn. 2 years to get her master's in architecture. She had been offered a junior drafting position at a boutique preservation firm in Center City. The kind of place that restored historic buildings instead of tearing them down. The kind of work she dreamed about doing since she was 16 and saw a Victorian house being renovated in her hometown. She had been in every measurable sense on her way. Hollis had asked her to marry him 9 months later. He was charming in the specific way of men who have decided exactly what they want from life and have begun assembling it like furniture from a catalog. You don't need grad school. He'd told her on the porch of her parents' house in Lancaster. You'll learn more on real jobs with me than you'll ever learn in a studio. I'm building something, Jeannie. I want you in it. She had believed him. She had believed, too, that the preservation firm would still be there in a year or 2 or 5, when the business was stable and they could breathe. Trevor was born in 1990. She was 25. Kendall followed 3 years later. The preservation firm merged with a larger group in the mid-90s, and the junior position evaporated into someone else's career. Someone who didn't have an infant and a toddler and a husband, who needed her to draft his commercial bids. Eleanor had drafted Hollis's first real bid on the kitchen table, while Trevor slept in a bouncer at her feet. She'd drafted the next one and the one after that, for free because they were a team, and the money was their money. And what was the difference? By the time Vaughn Construction was incorporated, she had stopped signing her drawings. By the time they bought the Chestnut Hill house, she had packed her drafting tools into a cedar trunk in the attic and set a framed photograph of her 3-year-old daughter on top of it. The trunk had stayed closed for 27 years. In a motel room on a Thursday in late October, Eleanor drove back to the Chestnut Hill house while Hollis was at work. She parked down the street, walked up the driveway like she was trespassing. Marisol answered the door. The housekeeper, a woman from Honduras who had worked for them for 12 years, who had cried when she heard about the divorce, who had slipped Eleanor her phone number on a piece of paper at the settlement and whispered, "Call me if you need anything." Eleanor asked if she could go up to the attic one last time. Marisol unlocked the door without a word. Then she went back to the kitchen and closed the door behind her. The attic was exactly as Eleanor had left it. Dust thick on the floorboards, cobwebs in the rafters, boxes of Christmas decorations, old furniture covered in sheets, the window at the far end streaked with rain and years. The trunk was still there, cedar wood gone dark with age, brass corners tarnished green, 2 dead moths on the lid, the photograph of Kendall at 3 years old, unchanged, her daughter's face frozen in a moment of joy. Eleanor couldn't quite remember the context for. She carried the trunk down 3 flights of stairs by herself. It was heavier than she remembered, or she was weaker, or both. She loaded it into the back of her 2011 Civic. The car Hollis had said was fine for running errands, but too old to take on long trips. She drove back to the motel. She did not open the trunk that night. She sat on the industrial carpet and looked at it the way you look at something that might still bite. Something that had teeth you'd forgotten about. She opened it on a Sunday morning with the motel curtains drawn against the light. Inside was a life she had forgotten she owned. Her drafting set in its mahogany case, the pencils still sharp, the compass still perfect, the T-square still straight, 3 rolls of vellum drawings from her final studio at Cornell. She unrolled one carefully. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but the ink was still black, still precise. Her handwriting in the title block. Eleanor Hale, the Ithaca Rail Depot Adaptive Reuse Project, Spring 1986. A stack of sketchbooks. She opened one at random. Pages and pages of building details, window casings, doorway arches, brick patterns, roof lines. All the things she used to notice everywhere she went. Her senior thesis, bound in navy cloth. The title embossed in fading gold letters. The Ethics of Restoration. What we owe the buildings we inherit. And at the very bottom in a manila envelope she did not remember placing there a folded letter on cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was looping and deliberate, old-fashioned, the kind of penmanship they don't teach anymore. The postmark said October 1994. The letter was from her mother's older sister, Great-Aunt Adelaide Whitmore, a woman Eleanor had met exactly twice in her entire life. Once at a funeral when Eleanor was 8. Once at a nursing home in Scranton when Eleanor was 17. And her mother had made her come along for a visit no one wanted to make. Adelaide had died in 1997 at the age of 91. Eleanor had been pregnant with Kendall and hadn't gone to the funeral. Her mother had said it was fine, that Adelaide wouldn't have cared, that they'd never been close. The family's quiet embarrassment her mother had called Adelaide once, a spinster, unmarried, childless, rumored to have lived with a woman in Philadelphia during the 1930s, cut out of her own father's will, barely mentioned at holidays, the kind of relative the family had decided not to love. Eleanor read the letter 3 times before she fully understood what she was holding. My dear Eleanor, your mother tells me you're pregnant again, and that Hollis has asked you to stop drawing. She says this as though it were good news, as though it were a relief to everyone involved. I am writing to you because I was once a young woman who was asked to stop drawing, and I did, and it is the only decision of my life I would undo if I could. You're the only person in this family who ever asked to see my plans. Do you remember? You were 8 years old. We were at your grandfather's funeral, and you found me in the library looking at a book of buildings. You asked what I did, and I said, I drew buildings, and you asked if you could see, and I showed you, and you didn't look away. Everyone else always looked away. I am leaving something to you, not to your mother, not to your brother, not to your children if you have them, to you. The paperwork is with Mr. Kellerman in Millbrook. When the time comes that you need it, and only you will know when that is, go and ask him. He will explain. Until then, tell no one. They will try to talk you out of it the way they talk me out of everything I ever wanted. Your loving aunt, Adelaide. Paperclip to the second page was a business card, the kind printed on heavy stock, slightly yellowed now. Howard Kellerman, Esquire. Kellerman and Sons. 14 Front Street, Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The card was 30 years old. Eleanor sat on the motel carpet for an hour, not moving, holding a letter written to a woman she barely remembered being. A woman who had asked to see an old lady's architectural drawings at a funeral, because buildings were more interesting than grief. She called the number on the card that afternoon. A man answered on the second ring. Kellerman and Associates. This is James Caldwell. Eleanor explained who she was. That she was looking for Howard Kellerman. There was a pause on the line. Mr. Kellerman passed away in 2008. His son, Howard Jr., retired in 2019. I'm his grandson. Well, I bought the practice. I kept the old files. Another pause. May I ask what this is regarding? Eleanor took a breath. My great-aunt was Adelaide Whitmore. She said there was paperwork, something she left for me. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long Eleanor thought the call had dropped. Then James Caldwell's voice came back quieter. Miss Hale. Yes. Can you drive up on Tuesday? I think so. There's a file. He cleared his throat. It's been waiting a long time. Millbrook was 2 hours and a world away from Philadelphia. Eleanor drove north on 476 through the last of autumn. The trees along the highway were rust and gold and bare. The exits came farther apart. The billboards thinned and then disappeared entirely. She passed through towns whose names she vaguely remembered from high school history class. Hazleton, Tamaqua, Shenandoah, old anthracite country. Coal towns that had thrived for 50 years and then collapsed when the mines closed and never recovered. The mountains rose around her, not the soft green hills of eastern Pennsylvania, but something older and harder. Exposed rock faces. Second-growth forests where the old timber had been cut 100 years ago. Millbrook itself was a single main street of red brick storefronts, half of them boarded up, windows empty or papered over. a diner with a neon sign that said, "Breakfast all day." A hardware store with paint cans stacked in the window. A funeral parlor. A bank that looked closed. And a law office with Kellerman still painted in gold leaf on the window, even though the Kellermans were apparently gone. James Caldwell was 38 years old. Thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a cardigan over a button-down shirt. He looked like a man who'd chosen to live in a dying town on purpose. He handed Eleanor a folder so thick she had to hold it with both hands. "Your aunt purchased this property outright in 1961. He spoke carefully, like he was reading from notes he'd prepared. "She placed it in a private trust in 1994. The trust was structured to transfer to you upon your application and presentation of identification. Property taxes have been paid every year from a pre-funded escrow account. The house has not been legally occupied since 1972. It is, as far as I can tell, the only residence in this county that does not appear on the current municipal tax map. An error apparently from a digitization project in 2003. Nobody's corrected it because nobody knew it was there." Eleanor looked up from the folder. "Where is it?" James Caldwell met her eyes. 3 miles north, end of Ashford Lane. You'll know when you see it." She drove. The road narrowed from 2 lanes to 1, from asphalt to gravel, from gravel to a rutted track through woods that pressed in close on both sides. Bare branches overhead. The sky visible only in patches. And then the trees opened, and there it was, a Queen Anne Victorian, 3 stories tall, a wraparound porch collapsing on the east side, a conical turret rising above the tree line, its slate tiles patched with moss and lichen, gingerbread trim rotted to lace in places but still hanging on, windows boarded from the inside with plywood that had gone gray from 50 years of weather, the whole structure leaning slightly to the left, stubbornly refusing to fall, and behind it, almost hidden in the overgrowth, a second building, smaller, square, carefully proportioned, a carriage house with a gable roof and narrow windows placed with the precision of someone who understood light. Eleanor got out of the car. She stood in the dead leaves and looked at the house and felt something move in her chest that had not moved in 3 decades. Not hope exactly. Something older than hope. Recognition. She called Kendall from the driveway. Her hands were shaking and she didn't know if it was from cold or adrenaline or fear. Her daughter answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom, I'm keeping it." "What? The house? The property Adelaide left me." "I'm keeping it. I'm going to restore it." Kendall laughed. Not cruelly, almost affectionately. The way you laugh at a child who said something absurd. "Mom, you're 64. You can't even live there. There's no heat. There's no water. You just said it's falling apart. Take the property. Sell it to whoever will buy it. Use the money for an apartment. A real apartment. Please. I'm not selling it." "Mom." Kendall's voice shifted. This is a breakdown. Eleanor looked up at the turret, at the finial still perfect at its peak, at the windows that had been dark for half a century waiting for someone to see them again. No. She said it quietly, calmly. This is the opposite of a breakdown. She hung up. She walked toward the porch. The steps creaked under her weight but held. The front door was locked and she didn't have a key. She walked around to the side, to the back. The overgrowth caught at her clothes. Thorns snagged her jacket. The back door was boarded over like all the rest. She stood there for a long time, looking at plywood nailed over a door she couldn't open, at a house she owned but couldn't enter, at a future she couldn't quite see, but could feel pulling at her like gravity. She slept in her car the first 3 nights because she was afraid of what she would find inside. Not ghosts exactly. Something closer to responsibility. Opening a house that had been sealed for 50 years was a commitment she wasn't sure her body could keep. Wasn't sure she had the strength for. Wasn't sure she deserved. But on the 4th morning, she woke up with frost on the windshield and her neck aching from the angle of the driver's seat. And she thought about the motel room waiting for her back in Ben Salem. About $71 a night draining into nothing. About $30,000 left and winter coming. She thought about Adelaide, 91 years old, alone in a nursing home, holding on to a secret for 30 years waiting for the one person who might understand. She thought about Trevor standing on the porch not helping her carry her suitcases. She thought about Hollis checking his watch. Eleanor got out of the car and walked into town. The hardware store was open. A bell jangled when she pushed through the door. The man behind the counter was in his 60s, thick gray hair, work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a name tag that said, Peter Hofstadter owner. She bought a crowbar for $14. He watched her count out the bills and didn't ask questions. The plywood over the back door was nailed with 20-year-old nails that had rusted into the wood. It took her 40 minutes to work the first board loose. Her hands blistered, her shoulders burned. Sweat ran down her back even though the October air was cold. When the plywood finally came free, the door itself was still there underneath. Solid oak, original to the house, swollen in its frame from decades of weather. She put her shoulder against it and pushed. It didn't move. She pushed harder. Still nothing. She braced her feet and threw her whole weight against the door, and something inside gave with a crack, like a bone breaking, and the door swung open into darkness. The smell that came out was not rot, as she had feared. It was something drier, older. Dust and cedar and old varnish and the faint mineral ghost of coal smoke from a chimney that had not drawn in half a century. Eleanor stood on the threshold for a long time before she went in. When she finally stepped through the doorway into the house that had waited 50 years for someone to come, the first thing she saw was light. Colored light falling through a stained glass window she hadn't been able to see from outside. Amber and deep green in geometric patterns, throwing colored shadows across a curved staircase that rose to a second-floor landing. The second thing she saw was that someone had closed this house properly. The furniture was draped in muslin sheets gone gray with dust, but still intact underneath. The plaster walls were cracked but not collapsed. The floor was solid, original chestnut, wide boards running unbroken down a central hall 12 feet wide. Eleanor walked slowly through rooms that smelled like memory. A parlor, a dining room, a kitchen with a cast iron stove and a deep ceramic sink. Every surface covered in dust, but nothing destroyed. She climbed the stairs. The banister was hand-turned, smooth under her palm even through the dust. The newel post was a single piece of quarter-sawn oak with a small brass medallion set into the top. She leaned closer. The medallion was engraved. A W, 1894. Adelaide had been born in 1906. The house was older than her aunt. Eleanor stood on the landing looking at that medallion and understanding slowly that Adelaide had not built this house. She had bought a house built by someone else who shared her initials. Or Eleanor stopped. Or Adelaide had changed her name at some point and come home. She filed the thought away and kept walking. The second floor had 4 bedrooms. She chose the smallest one, the one above the kitchen. It had the least water damage and a fireplace with a flue that she could see light through when she looked up the chimney. She spent 2 days cleaning that one room, sweeping out years of dust and leaves that had blown in through cracks in the walls, scrubbing the floor on her hands and knees, washing the window with water she carried up from the well outside in a bucket she found in the cellar. She drove back to town and bought a camping cot, a propane heater, a battery-powered lantern, a camp stove, a 5-gallon water jug. Peter Hofstadter watched her purchases accumulate over several trips. On the 4th trip, he asked without judgment, "You're in the old Whitmore place, aren't you?" Eleanor looked at him. Yes. He nodded once, wrote his cell phone number on the back of a receipt. "In case you run out of propane in the night, I'm up early." She moved into the house on a Saturday. 1 suitcase of clothes, the camping cot, the propane heater, the lantern. She made the bed with sheets from the motel, hung her clothes on nails she hammered into the wall herself. She sat on the cot as the sun went down and the colored light from the stained glass window faded, and the house settled into darkness around her. And for the first time in months, Eleanor Vaughn slept through the night without waking. The first month was assessment. Eleanor walked every room with a clipboard and her old drafting pencils measuring, sketching, noting. Her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten, the muscle memory of holding a pencil at exactly the right angle, the automatic calculation of proportion and scale, the way your eye learns to read a space. The house revealed itself slowly, like a person you're getting to know, showing you one room at a time who they used to be. The proportions were elegant and deliberate, not the ostentatious Queen Anne of pattern book builders trying to prove something. This was something restrained, precise, closer to the shingle style in its sensibility. Rooms sized for human occupation rather than display. Whoever had designed this house had known exactly what they were doing. The mechanical systems were a disaster. Knob and tube wiring from before the war. Cloth-wrapped copper wire that crumbled when you touched it. A boiler in the basement from the Eisenhower administration. Cast iron, rusted solid. A well pump that had seized decades ago. But the bones were extraordinary. No sag in the main beams. No movement in the foundation. The roof miraculously had held. The slate tiles were intact, except where moss had lifted a few. The flashing around the chimney was still good. The gutters were clogged with 50 years of leaves, but the brackets were solid. Someone had built this house to last, and then someone else had maintained it, with the kind of care that comes from love. Eleanor made lists. She ordered materials through the hardware store. Small amounts because she couldn't afford large ones. A box of roofing nails, a tube of caulk, sandpaper in 3 grits, wood putty, primer, a single gallon of exterior paint to test the color on a hidden section of trim. Peter Hofstadter never asked what she was doing. Just rang up her purchases and sometimes threw in an extra pair of work gloves or a putty knife he said had been sitting on the shelf too long. She learned by watching videos on her laptop in the diner where the Wi-Fi was free, how to repoint a chimney, the proper ratio of lime to sand, the angle to hold the trowel, how to reglaze a window sash, the patience required to soften old putty without breaking century-old glass, how to replace rotted porch boards with salvaged lumber, where to find the lumber, how to match the width and thickness, how to cut the tongue and groove by hand when you don't have the right tools. Her hands blistered and then calloused. Her back ached in places she hadn't known contained muscle. The space between her shoulder blades. The small of her back where she bent over to work. Her knees from kneeling on hard floors. She dropped 11 pounds in 6 weeks. Not from trying, from work. From forgetting to eat until her hands were shaking. From climbing ladders and hauling lumber and scraping paint until her body burned through everything she fed it. Her hair, which she had been coloring for 20 years, grew out silver at the roots. 2 inches of white before she even noticed. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror one morning and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. Thinner, harder, gray-haired, hands scarred and rough. She looked like someone who lived in the woods and built things. She let the gray keep growing. In the 2nd month, she turned her attention to the carriage house. It sat behind the main house about 50 feet back, connected by what had once been a brick path now almost completely overgrown with weeds and saplings, 22 feet square. 1 story. A steep gable roof with the same slate tiles as the main house. The door was locked with a cast iron padlock that had rusted into a solid mass. No key would turn it even if she had a key. Eleanor spent a full afternoon trying to break it, hitting it with a hammer, prying at it with the crowbar, finally smashing the hasp off the door frame with repeated strikes that left her arms trembling. When the door finally swung open, she had to stop and catch her breath before going inside. The room she found was not what she expected. It was a studio, not a carriage house at all. The floor was laid in the same chestnut as the main house. Wide boards, tight joints, still level after more than a century. There was a north-facing window the size of a door, 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide, paned with old handmade glass that had that wavy quality you can't replicate. The kind of window that gives you perfect indirect light all day long. A long drafting table ran the length of the back wall, 8 feet long, solid oak. The surface worn smooth from years of use, ink stains in the grain that had never come out. A set of built-in shelves held rolled plans, dozens of them, each one tied with brown twine that had gone brittle with age. And on the wall above the drafting table, hung in a simple wooden frame, was a diploma. School of Architecture, University of Pennsylvania, 1929, Adelaide Whitmore, and below it on a small brass plate screwed to the frame 5 words that made Eleanor sit down hard on the floor. First woman admitted to the program. She had not known. Nobody had told her. Her own mother, Adelaide's younger sister, had gone to her grave without saying the word architect in connection with her older sibling. Ever. Not at the funeral Eleanor had been forced to attend as a teenager. Not in any family story. Not in any conversation Eleanor could remember. The family's quiet embarrassment. The spinster aunt who lived alone and had strange ideas. That was all Eleanor had ever been told. She sat on the chestnut floor and looked at that diploma, and felt anger rising in her throat like bile. Then she stood up and walked to the shelves. She untied one of the rolls. The paper was vellum, old, yellowed at the edges but still intact. The drawing was a set of elevations for a small bank building, classical revival style, detailed cornices, arched windows, a copper dome, signed in the bottom right corner in careful architectural lettering. A. Whitmore, 1933. And stamped at the bottom with the name of a Philadelphia firm Eleanor vaguely recognized from her student days. Designed under the supervision of, and 2 male names. Eleanor untied another roll. A schoolhouse in Wilkes Barre. Brick, 2 stories. Large windows for natural light. A bell tower. Signed A. Whitmore. 1937, stamped. Designed under the supervision of different firm, different male names. Another roll. A department store in Scranton. Art Deco details. Limestone facade. Elegant proportions. A. Whitmore. 1940. Designed under the supervision of. She untied roll after roll. Bank buildings, schools, municipal offices, libraries, apartment buildings, a hospital wing, a courthouse addition, building after building, year after year. 1933, 1936. 1942, 1948, 1955, 1961. 35 years of work. Every single one signed A. Whitmore. Every single one stamped with someone else's name as the architect of record. Not a single building in Adelaide's own name. Eleanor sat on the floor surrounded by rolls of vellum and cried for the first time since the divorce. Not for herself. For the woman who had sent her a letter across 30 years and asked her quietly to come and look. The woman who had designed 100 buildings and been credited for none of them. The woman whose own family had been so ashamed of her, they'd erased her from their stories. Eleanor cried until her throat hurt, and her eyes burned and she had no tears left. Then she carefully rolled up every drawing and tied them back with their brown twine and placed them back on the shelves exactly as she'd found them. She stood in front of Adelaide's diploma for a long time. First woman admitted to the program. 1929. Eleanor tried to imagine what that had been like, walking into a room full of men who didn't think you belonged there, sitting in studios where you were the only woman, proving yourself over and over and still watching male classmates get the jobs you wanted, and then spending 35 years doing the work anyway, drawing buildings that would stand for a century. Buildings that would shelter people and serve communities and outlast everyone who ever walked through their doors, and never once getting to sign your name as the architect. Eleanor left the studio and walked back to the main house as the sun was setting. She heated water on the camp stove and made tea, and sat on the porch steps looking out at the trees. The house settled around her. The small creaks and groans of old wood adjusting to temperature changes, the scratch of branches against windows, the distant sound of water dripping somewhere in the cellar. It didn't feel haunted. It felt inhabited, like someone was still here, still waiting. Reggie Alcott found her in April. 6 months after she'd arrived in Millbrook. Eleanor was on a ladder reglazing a first-floor window when she heard tires on gravel. She'd learned to recognize the different sounds. Peter's truck with its bad muffler, the mail carrier's Jeep, the occasional lost tourist looking for a B&B that had closed in the 90s. This was something else. A Subaru wagon dented and mud-splattered. It pulled up at the edge of the driveway and a tall man in his early 70s climbed out. Silver hair cropped close, steel-rimmed glasses, wearing khakis and a canvas jacket and boots that had seen a lot of miles. He held a thermos in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He didn't approach immediately. Just stood at the edge of the driveway looking up at the house, at the turret, at the porch Eleanor had been slowly rebuilding, at the windows she'd reglazed one by one, the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. That's Philadelphia Queen Anne. He said it loud enough for her to hear, but not like he was talking to her specifically. More like he was talking to himself. 1890s. Probably commissioned by one of the mine operators. Your conical turret still has its original finial. I can see it from here. Which means whoever built this knew what they were doing, and whoever maintained it loved it. Eleanor climbed down from the ladder. I heard in town there was a woman restoring it alone. He turned to look at her then. I had to come see. He held up the thermos. I brought coffee. I'm not asking to help. I'm asking to look. Eleanor studied him. Her trust in strangers had thinned to a blade since the divorce, since Trevor standing on the porch not helping, since Hollis checking his watch while her life was loaded into a stranger's car. But there was something direct in this man's face, something honest in the way he stood there holding coffee like an offering. Something unembarrassed about his own loneliness that made it feel less like weakness and more like simple fact. "Come in." She stepped back from the door. "Mind the third floorboard in the foyer. It's gonna kill somebody eventually. My name's Reginald Alcott. People call me Reggie." He followed her inside. Retired from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. Preservation Field Office. 31 years. "My wife passed 2 years ago. I've been looking for something to pay attention to." He walked through the house for 2 hours. He didn't talk much, just moved slowly from room to room, running his palm along the banister, crouching at the base of the newel post to read the AW 1894 inscription, measuring the width of the hall with a laser tool he pulled from his jacket pocket, tapping the plaster in different rooms and listening to the sound it made. Eleanor followed at a distance, watching him work, watching the way his hands moved over surfaces, the way he stopped to really look at details. A corner where two pieces of trim met, the curve of a door arch, the spacing of floor joists visible through a hole in the ceiling. When he came back out to the porch where she'd gone back to reglazing his face was different. Eleanor. He took off his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt. "This house is nationally significant. Do you understand that? I know it's old. It's not just old." He put his glasses back on. "It's intact. I've surveyed maybe 800 Queen Annes in this state in my career. I have never seen one with original hardware, original glass, original floor, original turret, finial, original interior trim, and original stained glass all in the same building. This house is a time capsule, and whoever designed it was operating at a level of craft that very few builders in this region ever reached." Eleanor set down her putty knife. "Her name was Adelaide Whitmore. She was my great-aunt. She designed over 100 buildings in Pennsylvania and was never credited for a single one of them." Reggie looked at her for a long moment. "Show me." She took him to the studio. He stood in front of the framed diploma without speaking. Then he walked to the shelves and touched the end of one of the twine-tied rolls. Gently, the way you touch something that might dissolve under pressure. "May I?" Eleanor nodded. He untied 4 rolls, carried them to the drafting table, stood over them with his glasses pushed up on his forehead, examining the drawings one by one. When he was done, he sat down on the stool and put both hands flat on the table. "Eleanor, I know 3 of these buildings. I surveyed the Wilkes-Barre Schoolhouse in 1998. It's on the National Register. The firm of record is Caldwell and Penrose. There has never in the entire preservation literature of this state been any mention of an Adelaide Whitmore. That's what I thought. This isn't a restoration project anymore." He looked up at her. "This is a recovery project. For her." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she'd been carrying for months without realizing it was there. "Do you want help?" She asked it quietly, like she was afraid of the answer. Reggie stood up, extended his hand. "Yes." They shook on it like signing a contract. Reggie came 3 days a week after that. He brought his own tools, his own lunch, his own opinions which he offered only when asked. He didn't try to take over, didn't treat Eleanor like she needed rescuing or managing or protecting from her own decisions. He treated her as what she was, the architect of record on a complex preservation job. When other people started showing up, contractors from town who heard what was happening and wanted to see historical society members from Scranton who drove up on weekends, Reggie called her Ms. Hale, made it clear who was in charge, who owned this house and this project and this vision. They worked side by side, replacing rotted sills, repairing the porch foundation, rebuilding sections of the turret where water had gotten in. In June, he made a phone call. The following Saturday, a dark blue Honda pulled up the drive. The woman who got out was 52, wearing work boots under a linen dress, hair pulled back in a practical braid, wire-rimmed glasses, a canvas bag over her shoulder full of notebooks and cameras. She walked up to the porch where Eleanor was sanding a newel post and stuck out her hand. Dr. Jocelyn Hartwell, University of Pennsylvania School of Design. Reggie called me, said I needed to get up here immediately. Something about a find. Eleanor stood up, wiped sawdust off her hands, shook. Eleanor Hale. Dr. Hartwell smiled. I know who you are. Reggie sent me photos of the diploma. I drove through the night. Can I see the studio? Eleanor led her back. Dr. Hartwell spent 6 hours in the studio. She photographed every drawing, every detail, the diploma, the signature on each plan, the stamps from the supervising architects. She photographed Eleanor with permission holding one of Adelaide's elevations. As the sun started to set, they sat on the porch steps. Dr. Hartwell had a notebook open on her knee, pages of notes in handwriting so small Eleanor couldn't read it. I have been researching this period for 20 years. Dr. Hartwell said it without looking up from her notes. There are 3 women I can name who practiced architecture in Pennsylvania before 1940. Your aunt is the 4th. Her body of work, if we can authenticate the attributions in these drawings, is larger than the other 3 combined. She looked up then, met Eleanor's eyes. This is a major find, not a regional one, a national one. What happens now? Now we write, together, if you're willing. She flipped to a new page in her notebook, and we apply for a National Register nomination for this property under its own historical merit. And I introduce you to the Heritage Hollow Preservation Guild. They fund adaptive reuse projects led by underrepresented practitioners. They're going to lose their collective minds when I tell them what's sitting on this hillside. Eleanor watched the light fade behind the turret. Inside the house, Reggie was washing out coffee cups. The sound of water running. The clink of ceramic. Dr. Hartwell. Eleanor said it quietly. I was an architecture student a long time ago. I never practiced. Ms. Hale. Dr. Hartwell closed her notebook. You are practicing right now. Hollis arrived on a Saturday in late August. Eleanor was on the wraparound porch now, structurally sound on all 4 sides, scraping 50 years of lead paint off the original beadboard ceiling. Slow work. Tedious. The kind of thing that made your shoulders burn and your hands cramp. She heard the Range Rover before she saw it, that low, confident purr of a V8 engine that didn't belong on a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. She didn't come down from her stepladder. He parked badly, one tire on the grass, got out wearing loafers and a navy quarter zip and sunglasses that probably cost more than her propane bill for the winter. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps taking in the house, the rebuilt sections, the reglazed windows, the new copper downspouts that had cost her 6 weeks of careful budgeting. He had the same look he'd always had on job sites, the look that assessed, that priced, that cataloged what a thing could be extracted for. "Jeannie, you've been busy." "Hollis, the guy at the hardware store gave me directions. He seemed to know you. Most people here do." "May I come up?" "You may stay where you are." He took off the sunglasses, tried briefly the face he used to use when he wanted her to forgive something. The boyish smile, the slight shrug, the charm that had worked on her when she was 22. It had stopped working about a decade ago. "I wanted to see how you were doing. I heard you'd gone up into coal country and bought an old house. I was worried. You weren't worried enough to return 2 voicemails or reply to 1 email in 10 months. Eleanor kept scraping. Didn't look at him. "Why are you actually here?" He glanced at the turret, at the rebuilt porch, at the stacks of restoration-grade lumber under tarps in the side yard. "I've been talking to some preservation people in Philadelphia about the Whitmore find. It's impressive, Jeannie. I want you to know I think it's genuinely impressive." He paused, put his hands in his pockets. "I also want to be practical with you. This property with that story attached to it could be worth real money. Developers who specialize in heritage tourism are already circling." Eleanor stopped scraping, turned to look at him. "I have relationships." He said it like he was doing her a favor. "I can help you move this at a serious number. I take a broker's fee only. Friendly terms. How much do you think it's worth?" She asked it with clinical curiosity, the way you'd ask about the weather. Depending on condition and National Register application timing. He did the math visibly. 800,000-900,000, maybe $1 million too on the right day to the right buyer. Eleanor set down her scraper, climbed down from the stepladder, stood at the porch rail looking down at her ex-husband in his expensive shoes, standing in the dirt. "It's already appraised for $1.7 million, and it's not for sale. Not to you. Not to your contacts. Not ever." She spoke calmly, evenly, the way you'd read a grocery list. "The Adelaide Whitmore Archive is going to operate out of the carriage house as a permanent educational facility. The Heritage Hollow Preservation Guild is signing a 40-year stewardship partnership with me next month. The house is being entered into an irrevocable preservation trust that legally prevents its sale for profit. So you've had a long drive for nothing, Hollis. I'm sorry about your gas." His face changed. She had known it would. She had watched that face change across kitchen islands for 35 years whenever a deal went sideways, whenever someone said no to him, whenever the world didn't arrange itself the way he wanted. The affable mask dropped. The thing underneath came forward. The thing that had built an empire by never ever losing a negotiation. You bought this property with marital assets, Jeannie. I bought this property with my divorce settlement, which was final and unconditional. My attorneys disagree. Eleanor picked up her scraper, climbed back up the ladder, started working again. Then we'll let them disagree in court. Hollis put his sunglasses back on. He did not say goodbye, did not look back, just got in the Range Rover and drove away fast enough to spray gravel. Eleanor stayed on her ladder, kept scraping paint. She did not let her hands shake until after the sound of the engine had died. The certified letter arrived 9 days later. Eleanor was replacing broken shingles on the carriage house roof when Peter Hofstadter's truck pulled up. He got out holding a manila envelope. This came to the store. He looked uncomfortable. It's addressed to you, but it came certified. Had to sign for it. She climbed down, took the envelope. Inside were legal papers, thick, official. The kind printed on expensive paper with a law firm's letterhead embossed at the top. The lawsuit was an ambush of invented claims. Fraudulent concealment of the Whitmore inheritance during divorce proceedings. Improper use of marital settlement funds on a property with undisclosed material value. Claim for constructive trust over a percentage of the appreciated estate. Eleanor read through it twice. Then she drove to Millbrook. James Caldwell's office was on the second floor above a closed bakery. She climbed the narrow stairs and found him at a desk covered in files. He read through the lawsuit while she sat in a chair that had probably been there since his grandfather's time. When he finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Ms. Hale, this is legally baseless. You didn't know about the property during the marriage. The trust wasn't activated until after the divorce was final. He can't prove material value wasn't disclosed because there was nothing to disclose. So, he'll lose. Eventually. James put his glasses back on. But it's also going to be expensive and exhausting to make go away. He knows he won't win. He's hoping the cost breaks you before a judge does. Eleanor looked out the window at Millbrook's empty main street. Can I afford to fight it barely? James pulled out a calculator. Started running numbers. But it will eat most of what you've budgeted for the East Wing work this winter. And that's if nothing else goes wrong with the house. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Then she said, then we fight it. The litigation dragged through autumn like a slow fever. Hollis's attorneys filed motion after motion. Discovery requests, depositions, interrogatories that required Eleanor to document every conversation she'd ever had with Adelaide, every letter, every phone call, every family gathering where the property might have been mentioned. Eleanor had no documentation because there had been no conversations. Just one letter, written after she was already married, hidden in a trunk she hadn't opened for 27 years. James Caldwell filed responses, provided bank statements showing the settlement money deposited and then withdrawn to purchase the Millbrook property. provided the trust documents showing the transfer didn't occur until months after the divorce was final. Hollis's team didn't care about facts. They cared about cost. Every filing ate another $1,000. Another week of Eleanor's time. Another night she couldn't sleep because she was calculating how much longer she could afford to fight. Trevor called for the first time in a year on a Tuesday evening in October. Eleanor was in the studio cataloging Adelaide's drawings, photographing each one, recording the building name, location, date, supervising firm, creating the archive that would prove Adelaide's work had existed even when her name had been erased. She almost didn't answer the phone. Mom. Trevor's voice was careful, measured. The voice he used in business meetings. I wanted to check in, see how you were doing. I'm fine, Trevor. Dad's worried about you. This lawsuit. He doesn't want to do this, but his attorneys say he has to protect his interests. Eleanor set down her camera. Your father has no interests in this property. The divorce was final. The settlement was paid. This is harassment. I don't think that's fair. What do you want, Trevor? There was a pause on the line. I think you're being vindictive. I think you're being small. You could sell the property, split the proceeds with Dad, and everyone moves on. Your father got the house I lived in for 28 years. The beach house. The company I helped him build. The retirement accounts. The cars. Everything. And you think I'm being vindictive by keeping the one thing that was left to me by an aunt he never even met. Trevor's voice hardened. You always do this. You make yourself the victim. Dad built that company. You just drew some pictures. Eleanor hung up. She sat in Adelaide's studio, surrounded by drawings of 100 buildings, and felt the kind of anger that comes from a place so deep you forget it's there until someone strikes it like a match. Just drew some pictures. 35 years of work reduced to a dismissive phrase by the son she'd raised. She went back to photographing the drawings. Kendall called 2 days later. Eleanor was replacing broken floorboards in the east wing. The wood had rotted through where the porch had leaked. She was cutting new boards by hand from salvaged lumber Reggie had found at an architectural salvage yard in Reading. Mom. Kendall sounded tired. I hope you understand what this is doing to the family. What family? Eleanor kept working. Didn't stop cutting. The family where my son tells me I just drew some pictures. Where my daughter calls to tell me I'm hurting everyone by not giving your father more of my money. That's not fair. Eleanor set down the saw, sat back on her heels, looked at the phone in her sawdust-covered hand. You're right. It's not fair. It wasn't fair when your father spent our retirement money on a mistress young enough to be his daughter. It wasn't fair when he gave me $42,000 for 35 years of marriage. It wasn't fair when Trevor stood on that porch and watched me carry my own suitcases to a stranger's car. Mom, if you want to mend something between us, Kendall, it won't be through brokering on your father's behalf. It will be through actually caring about what happens to me, not what I can do for him. Kendall was crying. I do care. Then prove it. Eleanor hung up before she could say something she'd regret. She went back to cutting floorboards. Reggie brought her dinner twice a week. Soup in containers from the diner. Sandwiches. Once a whole roasted chicken he'd made himself. He didn't ask about the lawsuit. Didn't offer advice. Just sat with her on the porch steps and ate and talked about the work. How the East Wing repair was going. Whether the plaster in the dining room could be saved or needed to be replaced. The best way to refinish the chestnut floors without destroying the patina. Dr. Hartwell wrote her a letter that arrived in early November. My dear Ms. Hale, I have been following the legal proceedings against you with concern and increasing outrage. What your ex-husband is attempting is not merely an abuse of the legal system. It is an attempt to extract value from a woman's recovered inheritance after having already extracted value from her for half her life. I want you to know that the University of Pennsylvania School of Design will cover the cost of your legal defense as an official protection of scholarly work in progress. We believe that Adelaide Whitmore's archive represents a significant contribution to the historical record of American architecture. We will not stand by and watch it be threatened. The letter was signed by Dr. Hartwell and the Dean of the School of Design. James Caldwell filed the paperwork the following Monday. Hollis's attorneys filed 7 more motions by the end of November and achieved exactly nothing. The December hearing was held in a county courthouse in Scranton. A room with wood paneling and fluorescent lights and a smell like old books and floor wax. Eleanor sat at the defendant's table with James. Hollis sat across the aisle with his legal team. 3 attorneys in suits that probably cost more than Eleanor's car. Hollis didn't look at her once during the entire proceeding. His lead attorney called Trevor as a witness. Eleanor watched her son walk to the stand. 42 years old in a suit Hollis had probably bought him. Hair cut short, clean shaven. Looking more like his father every year. Trevor testified that Eleanor had always talked about Aunt Adelaide growing up, that she'd mentioned valuable property, that she'd concealed assets during the marriage. James cross-examined carefully. Can you cite a specific conversation where your mother mentioned this property? Trevor hesitated. Not a specific conversation. No. It was just general family knowledge. What was this general family knowledge that Aunt Adelaide owned property somewhere? Did your mother ever tell you where this property was located? No. Did she ever describe the property? No. Did she ever mention its value? No. Did she ever indicate she expected to inherit it? No. So this general family knowledge consisted of the fact that an elderly relative owned property somewhere. Is that correct? Trevor's jaw tightened. Yes. And every family with elderly relatives could say the same thing. Couldn't they, I suppose? Do you have any documentation of these conversations about the property? No. Any emails, text messages, letters? No. Any witnesses who heard these conversations? No. So we're expected to believe your mother concealed an asset she didn't know existed until after her divorce was final. Based on your recollection of conversations you can't specifically remember, and no one else can corroborate. Objection. The judge allowed it. Trevor stepped down. Still didn't look at Eleanor. She watched him walk back to sit behind his father and felt something inside her go quiet and still. Not grief exactly. Acceptance. Her son had chosen years ago. This was just the formality of it being spoken out loud in a room where it would be recorded. The judge was skeptical of Hollis's claims. Eleanor could see it in the way she looked over her glasses at the attorneys, the way she asked pointed questions about the timeline. But the hearing was continued. More discovery needed. More time for both sides to present evidence. It would drag on. That was the point. Eleanor drove back to Millbrook in the dark. Snow was starting to fall. Light flakes that melted when they hit the windshield. Winter was coming, and she had a lawsuit eating her budget and a house that still needed so much work. She parked in the driveway and sat looking at the house, at the windows glowing with lamplight from inside, at the porch she'd rebuilt with her own hands, at the turret rising against the night sky. And she thought about Adelaide, 91 years old, designing buildings until the end, and never seeing her name on a single one. If Adelaide could do that, Eleanor could survive a lawsuit from a man who'd already taken everything he was gonna get. She went inside, made tea, sat at Adelaide's drafting table and kept working on the archive. The blizzard hit in January on a Thursday night. The weather forecast had called for snow, but not like this. Not the kind of storm that buried the world in white and made roads impassable and knocked out power lines. Eleanor was alone in the house. Reggie had tried to come up that morning, but his truck couldn't make it through the drifts on Ashford Lane. He'd called to tell her to stay inside, stay warm. Wait it out. She had the propane heater running in her bedroom. Candles and lanterns ready if the generator failed. Food that didn't need cooking. Water stored in jugs. The temperature dropped to 15 below zero. The wind screamed around the house like something alive and angry. At 2 a.m, Eleanor woke to a sound like a gunshot. She grabbed the flashlight and ran downstairs. The east wing porch had collapsed. The weight of the snow combined with the support beam she hadn't gotten to yet had given way. The whole section had come down. Boards and posts and roofing scattered across the frozen ground. But that wasn't the worst part. The falling debris had struck the foundation wall of the main house. A crack ran from the basement up through the first floor, visible even in the flashlight beam, wide enough to fit her finger in. And from somewhere in the basement came the sound of running water. A pipe had burst. Eleanor pulled on boots and a coat over her pajamas and went down into the cellar. The water was pouring from a broken joint in the main line, spraying across the stone foundation, already pooling on the floor, already starting to freeze. If she didn't stop it, the entire plumbing system would freeze and burst. The basement would flood. The foundation crack would widen from ice expansion. The house could be condemned by the time anyone could get here to help. And if the house was condemned before the lawsuit was resolved, Hollis would win by default. Eleanor waded through ankle-deep water to the main shut-off valve. Tried to turn it. It was frozen solid. She tried again, threw all her weight against it. Nothing. The water kept pouring. The temperature in the basement was already below freezing. Her breath came out in clouds. Her fingers were going numb even in gloves. She stood there for a moment in the dark with water soaking through her boots and thought about calling someone. But who, Reggie couldn't get here. James Caldwell was 2 hours away in good weather. Dr. Hartwell was in Philadelphia. She was alone. 64 years old, standing in a flooding basement at 2 in the morning in the middle of a blizzard, with a lawsuit trying to take her house, and her son testifying against her, and no one coming to help. Eleanor went back upstairs. She called Reggie. He answered on the first ring. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" The east porch collapsed. Foundation wall cracked. Pipe burst in the basement. Main valve won't turn. I need help. Now. Reggie was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'm coming. Call Peter. Tell him to open the hardware store. We're buying everything on my credit. It's 2 in the morning. He'll open. Call him. Then start gathering every towel and blanket you have. We need to slow that water down. Reggie, you can't drive through this. Watch me." Peter Hofstadter answered his cell phone on the second ring like he'd been waiting for a call. He didn't ask questions, just said, "I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. Eleanor spent the next hour doing everything she could to slow the flood. Towels packed around the broken pipe, buckets catching overflow, blankets stuffed against the crack in the foundation to keep the wind from driving snow through. It wasn't enough. The water kept coming. At 4 in the morning, she heard an engine. Reggie's Subaru came up the drive like a tank. Chains on the tires. Headlights cutting through the snow. He got out carrying a toolbox and a propane torch. Peter's truck pulled up behind him, loaded with supplies. They worked for 72 hours straight. Reggie and Peter and Eleanor and 2 other men from Millbrook, who showed up at dawn on Friday. Retired contractors who remembered this house from when they were young, who said Adelaide used to hire their fathers to do maintenance work, who came because they wanted to see the house saved. They thawed the valve with the propane torch and shut off the water. They shored up the foundation crack with emergency jacks and concrete mix that Peter brought from the store. They rerouted the plumbing around the frozen sections using copper pipe and fittings. They cleared the debris from the collapsed porch and tarped the exposed sections of the house. They worked in shifts. Someone always awake, always monitoring, making sure nothing else gave way. Dr. Hartwell drove up from Philadelphia on Saturday morning, 4 hours through a blizzard in her Honda. She brought coffee and food and refused to leave. On Sunday evening, they sat in Eleanor's kitchen, exhausted, faces gray with fatigue, hands raw from cold. The house was stabilized, barely, but saved. Peter refused payment, said he'd add it to her account and she could settle up when the lawsuit was done. The 2 contractors from Millbrook wouldn't take money either, just shook Eleanor's hand and said Adelaide was a good woman, and this house deserved to stand. Dr. Hartwell sat across the table from Eleanor drinking coffee that had gone cold. "You need to call the press." She said it quietly but firmly. "Hollis is trying to break you quietly. Make this loud." Eleanor shook her head. "I don't want to be a story. You're not." Dr. Hartwell leaned forward. "Adelaide is. You're just the architect finally putting her name on the drawings." Reggie nodded. "She's right. This lawsuit, what he's doing. People need to know." Eleanor looked around the kitchen at the people who had driven through a blizzard to save a house they didn't own, who had worked for 3 days without sleep because they believed in something. She thought about Adelaide. 35 years of work. Never speaking up. Never fighting back. Just quietly doing the work and hoping someone would eventually notice. Eleanor was tired of being quiet. "All right." She looked at Dr. Hartwell. "How do we do this?" Nina Crawford was 34 years old and had been chasing the Adelaide Whitmore story for 3 weeks when Dr. Hartwell finally returned her emails. She was a freelance journalist, the kind who lived in a studio apartment in Brooklyn and survived on coffee and stubbornness, the kind who followed leads that didn't pay until they did. She'd gotten a tip from a graduate student in Dr. Hartwell's department, something about the biggest architectural rediscovery of the decade happening in a boarded-up house in coal country. And the woman doing the rediscovering was being sued by her ex-husband for the privilege. Nina had cold emailed Dr. Hartwell, then cold called Reggie, then driven 4 hours without calling ahead because some stories you have to see standing up. She knocked on Eleanor's door on a Tuesday morning in early December. Eleanor almost turned her away. She'd done no press, had avoided it intentionally. The work was what mattered. Adelaide's legacy, not Eleanor's story. But Nina stood on the porch in a canvas jacket with a notebook in her hand and said the thing that changed everything. "Miss Hale, I read your aunt's thesis advisor's obituary in the Penn archives last week. He called her the most gifted student he ever taught in a private letter that was never published. He died in 1962. For 64 years, nobody has said her name in print." Nina looked Eleanor in the eye. "Give me a day. Let me try." Eleanor gave her 2. Nina photographed the house, the studio, the drawings. She interviewed Reggie and Dr. Hartwell and Peter Hofstadter and James Caldwell. She asked Eleanor questions no one had asked before. What did it feel like to open that trunk after 27 years? What went through your mind when you saw Adelaide's diploma? What does it mean to rebuild a house at 64? When the world tells you you're too old? Eleanor answered honestly. It felt like waking up from a long sleep. It felt like grief and rage and recognition all at once. It means proving that knowledge doesn't expire, that women don't become irrelevant when they stop being convenient, that the second half of a life can be larger than the first. The article ran in a national Sunday magazine on the first weekend of January. 9,000 words. The headline was "The House That Wasn't There," and the woman who was never supposed to find it. It told Adelaide's story, the diploma from 1929, the 35 years of uncredited work, the buildings that still stood across Pennsylvania with other men's names on the plaques. It told Eleanor's story, the Cornell thesis, the abandoned graduate program, the kitchen table blueprints, the $42,000 settlement, the motel, the trunk, the letter. It named Hollis. It quoted the language from his lawsuit filings verbatim, which was the most damaging thing Nina could have done. Because on the page, stripped of charm and expensive attorneys, his claims read exactly like what they were. A man attempting to extract value from a woman's recovered inheritance after having already extracted value from her for half her life. The piece was picked up everywhere. Architectural press, preservation journals, women's magazines, legal blogs, wire services. A video of Dr. Hartwell explaining Adelaide's erasure on a morning show went viral. 2 million views in 3 days. By Wednesday, Eleanor had 4,300 unread emails. On Friday, Hollis's attorneys filed to dismiss the lawsuit without prejudice. James Caldwell called Eleanor while she was reglazing windows in the carriage house. "It's over." His voice was careful, like he didn't quite believe it. "They're withdrawing everything. No admission of wrongdoing, but they're done." Eleanor set down her putty knife. Just like that. Just like that. He paused. He ran Ms. Hale. The publicity was killing him. His business partners were asking questions. His new wife's law firm was uncomfortable. He ran. Eleanor sat down on Adelaide's stool. The lawsuit was over. But the letters kept coming. Actual letters, on paper, in envelopes with handwritten addresses and stamps in the corner. They came from Tucson and Tallahassee and Duluth, from Sacramento and Buffalo, and a town in Kentucky Eleanor had to look up on a map. All from women. Women in their 60s and 70s and 80s. Women who had read Nina's article and seen themselves in it. I was a nurse. I wanted to be a doctor. I gave it up when I got married. I'm 72 now. Is it too late? I studied biology. I married a pastor. My notebooks are in a box in the garage. I haven't opened them in 40 years. Is it too late I'm 68? I stopped painting in 1981 because my husband said it was selfish. Is it too late? Eleanor read every single one. She didn't have time to answer all of them, but she answered what she could. It's not too late. It's never too late. Knowledge doesn't expire. Your hands still remember. Start now. On a Sunday in March, Eleanor sat at Adelaide's drafting table, with Reggie pouring coffee in the corner, and Dr. Hartwell reviewing catalog notes. We should teach. Eleanor said it quietly, like the idea had been forming for months and had finally found words. Reggie set down the coffee pot. We should. Dr. Hartwell looked up from her notes when, this summer, Eleanor pulled out a notebook, started sketching, a workshop, reading a building, an introduction to historic assessment for women over 50. How many students? 12. small enough to actually teach, large enough to matter. They advertised through Dr. Hartwell's department, through preservation societies, through the networks of women who'd written letters. They set the age requirement at 50 and up, no upper limit. 47 women applied. Eleanor read every application, every story of deferred dreams and shelved ambitions and talents buried under decades of being what other people needed. She chose 12. The first workshop ran in June. Reading a building. Introduction to historic assessment. 1 week. Residential. The women came with notebooks and questions and a hunger Eleanor recognized because she'd felt it herself. They learned to read a structure, to see what was original and what was added, to understand load-bearing walls and settlement patterns and the difference between cosmetic damage and structural failure. They learned to measure and sketch and document. They worked on the house, hands-on, under Eleanor's guidance and Reggie's expertise. A 71-year-old retired accountant from Harrisburg named Lucinda stayed 11 weeks after the workshop ended, left with a provisional apprenticeship at a preservation firm in Reading. A 66-year-old former bank manager named Ophelia went home to West Virginia and started surveying unlisted Victorian houses in her town. They ran the workshop twice that summer, 3 times the summer after. The Heritage Hollow Preservation Guild funded the conversion of the main house's first floor into teaching space. Proper classroom, library, work tables. The second floor remained Eleanor's private apartment. The carriage house became the Adelaide Whitmore Archive, open by appointment. Adelaide's drawings framed along the walls under museum-grade glass, each one now bearing a brass plaque. A. Whitmore Architect, no supervising firm listed. The attribution corrected 60 years late. Willa came first, 15 years old that October, 2.5 years after the lawsuit ended. Eleanor was on her knees in the front parlor, rehanging a section of baseboard when she heard footsteps on the porch. She looked up expecting Reggie or a student or someone from the guild. Instead, she saw her granddaughter, tall, serious, wearing a canvas barn jacket and holding a printout of Nina's article folded into a square. Grandma. Eleanor sat back on her heels, then stood slowly, wiped sawdust off her hands, crossed the room, held her granddaughter for the first time since the girl was 12 years old. Kendall was on the porch, hands in her coat pockets, not coming inside. She'd been crying in the car. Eleanor could tell. Mom. Kendall's voice was small. I don't know how to start this. Then don't start it yet. Eleanor stepped back. Come in, I'll make coffee. She gave them a tour, showed Willa the stained glass on the landing, the brass medallion on the newel post, the drafting table where Adelaide's plans still rested under archival weights. Willa asked intelligent questions in a quiet voice about the architecture, about Adelaide, about what it took to restore something this old. Kendall didn't say much until they reached the carriage house. She stopped in front of Adelaide's framed diploma, read the brass plate beneath it. First woman admitted to the program. Thesis distinction. You told me once when I was about her age that you'd wanted to be an architect. Kendall said it without turning around. I laughed. Eleanor waited. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know. Dad told us you were having a breakdown. Kendall turned then, tears on her face. I chose to believe him because it was easier. I know that too. They sat on the porch steps after Willa had gone back into the main house to keep reading Adelaide's papers. The October light was turning gold through the trees. The air smelled like wood smoke from someone's chimney down in the valley. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. Kendall held her coffee with both hands. They can't. Eleanor looked out at the woods. I'm not the woman I was, Kendall. I'm not going to manage your father's feelings for you. I'm not going to pretend the last 3 years didn't happen. She turned to look at her daughter. If you want to know me, you're going to have to know the person I actually am now, not the mother you remember. Kendall nodded. I want that. Then we can start. Trevor never came. He sent a birthday card the following March, signed only with his name, no message. Eleanor kept it in a drawer, didn't write back. Some doors closed because someone walks through them in the other direction. Some doors close because no one ever walks through them at all. She had learned finally the difference. Hollis married Vanessa in June. Waterfront ceremony in Stone Harbor. Eleanor heard about it from Willa, who reported it with the flat teenage disapproval that could cut deeper than any adult commentary. Eleanor stood in her kitchen with tea going cold in her hand and felt exactly what she'd felt about Hollis for the last 2 years. Nothing. Not satisfaction. Not regret. Just an empty room where a person used to live. She set the tea down and went back to the blueprints on her dining table. By the following week, she couldn't remember what day the wedding had happened. On the 3rd anniversary of her arrival in Millbrook, the house hosted an open day. 140 people came, former students from every workshop, women who'd taken what they learned and started their own projects, started their own surveys, started their own second acts. Reggie made a short speech about craft and patience that made several people cry. Dr. Hartwell announced the publication date of the forthcoming monograph. Whitmore, the architect who wasn't there. James Caldwell came wearing a blazer that was too big for him and looking proud. Peter Hofstadter closed the hardware store for the afternoon. First time in 31 years. Kendall came, and Willa with a sketchbook under her arm that hadn't left her hand in 6 months. Eleanor stood at the top of the porch steps at dusk, looking out at people spread across the lawn she had cleared by hand. Talking in small clusters under the turret, she had reslated one row at a time. She thought about the sidewalk in Chestnut Hill, about cold tea in a ceramic mug, about watching her life loaded into a stranger's car. She thought about the 21-year-old in a Cornell studio at 3 in the morning. She thought about Adelaide at her drafting table in 1933, signing a drawing she would never be credited for. When her marriage ended, Eleanor had lost the things she'd been told to build a life on. A house, a name, her children's loyalty. the identity of 35 years. It had been briefly the end of everything, but in losing it she had found what remained, knowledge that had not expired. A woman, now two women whose work had not died. The steady grace of building something that would outlast her. She was 67 years old. Her life had started for the second time 3 years earlier, on the day she carried 3 suitcases to the curb. The sun set behind the turret. The sky went purple and gold. The first stars came out. Someone started playing guitar. Someone else began to sing. Old folk songs, the kind that get passed down. Eleanor descended the steps and walked among her students and her friends and the people who had helped save this house. Willa found her near the carriage house. "Grandma, can I show you something?" "Of course." Willa opened her sketchbook, page after page of architectural drawings, buildings she'd designed, details she'd studied, windows and doorways and roof lines, her handwriting in the margins, notes, measurements, ideas. "I want to study architecture." Willa said it quietly, like she was afraid of the answer. "Mom says I should think about it more. Dad says it's a hard field for women." Eleanor took the sketchbook, looked at the drawings, really looked. They were good, better than good. They had the kind of careful observation that couldn't be taught. That came from actually seeing. "What do you think I should do?" Willa asked. Eleanor handed back the sketchbook. "I think you should apply. I think you should fight for it. I think you should put your name on every single thing you create and never let anyone convince you to stop." She put her hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "And I think when you graduate there will be a drafting table waiting for you here, if you want it." Willa smiled, a real smile, the kind that changes a face. "I want it." The party went on into the night. Eleanor slipped away eventually, walked back to the house, up the stairs to her apartment on the second floor. She stood at the window looking down at the people on her lawn, at the house that had been invisible for 50 years and was invisible no more. Tomorrow she would teach another workshop. Next month, another group of women would arrive with their deferred dreams and their capable hands. Next year, the monograph would be published, and Adelaide's name would finally enter the historical record where it had always belonged. The house would stand. The archive would grow. The work would continue. Eleanor Vaughn had spent 35 years being told what her life should look like. At 64, she had started over with 3 suitcases and $42,000, and a letter from a woman who had been erased. At 67, she had built something that would outlast them all. She turned from the window, went to her desk, opened her notebook, started sketching plans for the East Wing renovation. There was still so much work to do, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor had all the time in the world.